are going to really work to keep in mind what you just saw on that amazing documentary about how the fog and how the weather systems, how the microclimates in this extreme climate, in these extreme valleys, really impact the styles of wine that we're making and the choices that our viticulturists, that our winemakers are making every day when they consider what to plant, how to grow, and what to make in the cellar. What decisions they're making based off of how the climate responds to these very classical grape varieties and wine styles in the glass. So with that, the geographical diversity of Sonoma County is extreme. We have 19 different AVAs that have been parceled out and carved out over time as our viticulturists, our vignerons and winemakers have been spending time in each region, working with the soils, working with these old vines, and understanding how each AVA differs from the next, and working through a very arduous system with the TTB, which is the federal agency in the US, where you have to apply to have an American viticultural area recognized. It takes several years, several thousand rewrites, paperwork to get an AVA recognized. And there are some very special AVAs in the Sonoma County AVAs. The most recent being the West Sonoma Coast and also Fort Ross Seaview, and one very special, Carneros, which is part of an AVA that is really defined by the very microclimate. So we'll chat about that in a moment when we get to the Donum wine as well. Something else to keep in mind is that because of this variety of microclimates, there are literally hundreds of grape varieties that may succeed in these valleys, benchlands, and hillsides. And as more importation of grapevine diversity happens, we are finding new places for optimum varieties and optimum clones. But we can't forget our heritage that was planted more than 100 years ago by immigrants who came over, bringing with them the vines that they brought from their villages, from Croatia, from Italy. And these diverse plantings, 100-year-old own-rooted plantings, still exist today in Sonoma County, in mostly the warmer, dry growing areas of Dry Creek, Sonoma County, Alexander Valley, and some of these AVAs that have these centenarian vines that teach us so much and are so resilient in the face of a changing climate. 85% of our wineries in Sonoma are also family owned and have resisted the takeover of corporate partnership. And 99% of our vineyards are sustainable, with an aim to be 100% sustainable within the next 10 years, and the same for our wineries. And so wineries are really paying attention to water usage, water waste, and how to be more energy efficient and sustainable in the winery. Our vineyards are doing a great job and are one of the only AVAs in the US to be nearly 100% sustainable. This session is about diverse microclimates of Sonoma as well. So keep in mind the formation of those lateral valleys, those subduction zones that had the lake influence, the drainage of the lake that left behind soils that are sandy, that are alluvial, the meandering of the water courses and water systems that have moved and changed over time, leaving behind alluvial fans and benchlands, and then the hillsides that are volcanic in nature, rocky hillsides exposed that really make the vines struggle for nutrients, struggle to exist, and struggle to create a low-yielding, high-quality crop from the grape varieties planted there. So Sonoma has a growing season that is almost ideal. We call it Mediterranean for the majority of the region. But Sonoma from the western coast that brushes up against the cold Pacific Ocean, that cold Alaskan current that brings cold water from Alaska down past the coast, brings with it cold air influences that hit the coastline and make it a UC Davis Region 1 growing area, as cool as Champagne, as cool as Burgundy. Moving inland, we move into Region 2, and then finally, as we move north and east into the Alexander Valley, we move into Region 3. So this means that on the coast, we are looking at cool climate varieties, Chardonnay, Milan, Pinot Noir, sparkling wines, cool climate wine styles. Moving into the next valley where we start to still continue that sparkling and Burgundian conversation, especially down in the southern part, but moving further north, we're able to explore Mediterranean varieties. Zinfandel, Carignan, Sangiovese, Barbera, amazing Italian varieties and Mediterranean varieties. And then finally moving into the most easterly valley, which is an extension of Napa Valley, we are able to really ripen fully Bordeaux varieties. So thicker skinned, really concentrated berries, structured wines with fruit density and tannin power. The fog is all important conversation in the majority of our AVAs in Sonoma. So that coastal offshore winds, and then that fog that you saw that comes in the evening as the valleys heat up and it sucks in the cool air from the coast, creating humidity and fog banks that shroud our vineyards and give us an extended growing season that really allows us to pick at the end of the growing season when wine and grape varieties make their most concentrated, most balanced fruit when harvested at the very end of the growing season in balance with their flavors, acidity, and ripeness of tannins. Let's get into the wines. As I mentioned, Mediterranean growing season is really important. Mediterranean by California standards means dry summers. We have ample rainfall in the winter and fall months, but what's really important is those dry summers, which really start to dry out in May and leave us without any rainfall and very little cloud cover until the end of September, providing a long, protracted growing season that allows us to ripen many varieties and really pick when the winemakers and the vine gives the signal that the grapes are ready to be harvested. So very important climate consideration along with the fog. Sauvignon Blanc, which is a very important grape variety in California and in the Sonoma County AVA. Sauvignon Blanc was really commercialized and brought to Americans by Robert Mondavi nearly 50 years ago now. And this grape variety is truly Californian in style. And this wine, the St. Francis Wild Oak Vineyard, it's a low bench and alluvial gravel soiled vineyard. So it gets direct overhead sunshine. It doesn't get a lot of aspect of slope and ripening of the skins. And again, the fog bank comes into Sonoma County and covers a lot of this vineyard in the evenings and in the morning. So really extending the growing season here, allowing the vine to naturally ripen very evenly, developing really beautiful grapefruit characters. I love this wine for it's moved away from that sort of grassiness that we expect from a lot of Sauvignon Blanc. It's much riper, but it still has that amazing brightness of fruit and juicy acidity that the white wines from Sonoma are so well known for. And that is because of this fog and the ability to ripen that fruit to optimum ripening levels and bring in that juicy acidity.
And I think this wine is a great example of the climate in Sonoma Valley, because Sonoma Valley, and one of the things I think Bree mentioned, but just to be clear, Sonoma Valley is just one small appellation within Sonoma County. So something to point out, when people say Napa wines, Napa Valley appellation is almost identical to Napa County. Sonoma is different. Sonoma Valley is just that very small, where the star is, and a very small part of the overall Sonoma County. Sonoma Valley itself is quite famous for Cabernet Sauvignon, so it's a fairly warm climate. And so when Brie points out that this Sauvignon Blanc has ripened away from the green herbaceous characters, this is not Marlborough, this is not Sancerre. This is quite a warm climate, but then it's the cold nights that keep that beautiful freshness and racy acidity.
Yeah, really warm mornings and covered fogs. And keep in mind that it is at the southern end of Sonoma County and Sonoma Valley. And so that fog bank that comes in off of San Pablo Bay covers those vineyards and creeps up there. And it's the first to also move out in the mornings as well. So by lunchtime, these grapes are sort of basking in the gentle sunshine of the day. I really like the little bit of phenolic texture that the acacia barrels bring into this. It makes it just a little floral and elderflower and just a hint of grippiness on the back palate, which makes it a really textural, interesting wine, and almost has like an al dente, like you're biting into a crisp green apple fruit. So let's move into the next wine. This is Viognier from Russian River Valley. So slightly closer to the coast, but just a little more northerly and just coming out of where the fog influence really sits. Russian River Valley is renowned for Pinot Noir and also renowned for Chardonnay, but slightly riper styles of these varieties. It gets warmer earlier in the day, and the heat degree units rack up a little bit more in the afternoon. So providing really ample fruit to these wines. And I think that's one of the reasons that Viognier has been planted here as well. There's still a lot of experimentation in Napa Valley, and keep in mind, Russian River Valley is also renowned for Syrah. And if anyone was in the class yesterday, we had an amazing Syrah that had about 10% Viognier co-fermented in it as well, bringing that beautiful floral note, lifting the fruit and the spice, but making a really lovely harmony and partnership to the meatier notes of Syrah and the peppery component. So keep in mind that Viognier here isn't always just a white grape and a white wine. This could be pressed for white wine and then the skins retained for Syrah fermentation and production. So Viognier is important, but in smaller numbers, and this wine is only about 100 cases. So 100% neutral French oak fermentation and 4 months in barrel, which I think also brings some of the restraint and also some of the cool climate freshness that we expect from the Sonoma, from Russian River Valley as well. Russian River Valley, we already mentioned the Pinot Noir, Chardonnay. We spoke about the soils in this valley yesterday, and it's really just a continuation of those alluvial gravels, some sandy benches, and again, volcanic hillsides emerging as well. And then elevation comes into play here in Russian River Valley as well for those Pinot Noirs and cool climate Chardonnays. The higher you get in elevation, you lose about a degree in temperature for every 100 meters you go up. And so it is cooler at those top of the hillsides of the coast mountain range there where these varieties are planted. So keep that in mind when you're tasting Russian River Valley Chardonnay and Pinot Noir.
This wine serves as our introduction to the Carneros AVA. Donum Estate, we're specialists in Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. In fact, we've got wines just over there if you want to come by afterwards and taste some Chardonnay and Pinot Noir wines. For this seminar, we've included our Rosé, and so it's really a Blanc de Noir. You can see a very faint pink color. We don't give it any maceration. This is just the bit of color that the Pinot Noir picks up, comes from the Pinot Noir in the press. One of the things that makes this distinctive in the world of California rosés, a lot of California rosés are saignée wines where they've drained some of the juice off their red wine production. This block is grown specifically to make rosé and then harvested specifically to make rosé. And this all ties in with our philosophy of really trying to express the terroir, express the microclimates. So all our wines are single vineyard, and most of them are single block within that vineyard. A little bit of story about Carneros. One of the things to point out about Carneros is it's, as Brie mentioned, one of the AVAs that was defined by its climate, primarily by its climate. It's also unusual, it's not unique, but it's one of the very few AVAs or appellations that stretches between two counties. So many people know Carneros in Napa because the Carneros AVA stretches over into Napa County. Donum Estate, we're on the Sonoma County side of Carneros. So the beauty of this area is it has two cooling influences. Brie already mentioned the importance of the coastal influence. And being in Carneros, there's now an AVA named Petaluma Gap, but before there was an AVA named Petaluma Gap, this refers to a geographical feature where there is a gap in the coastal mountains, and that allows cold air to flow in. So much more so than some of the more protected areas like Sonoma Valley, we get direct wind blowing into our vineyards in Carneros. And we are one of the furthest to the west, so we get a lot of that direct coastal wind. But also, what's not shown on this map is San Francisco Bay is here. But when you're standing in our vineyards, you can see the cool water of San Francisco Bay literally a kilometer away. It's very, very close. And so that is a constant source of air conditioning. It keeps the temperature much, much cooler than if we were further north in Sonoma Valley, in some of the more sheltered areas. So this is why it's been developed as a Chardonnay and Pinot Noir specialized area. Come and taste our Chardonnays and Pinot Noirs if you have time and have a chance. But I think this Rosé also fits the story of reflecting terroir. As I said, grown specifically for Rosé, harvested really early, about 19.5 bricks, so it gets a nice light alcohol. The acidity in this is all natural acidity. So it shows how this cool climate can protect and reflect that racy, mouth-watering deliciousness. This wine is fermented 100% with native yeast fermentation. And that also ties into another key factor of our winery story, which is we were the first winery in Carneros to be certified as regenerative organic, which, if you know, is a big step beyond just organic. It's one of our vineyard managers sometimes describes it as biodynamic without the religion. So it looks like a biodynamic vineyard. The soils are so rich, the microbiome in the soil is rich, but it's not following the rules from 120 years ago in the Steiner method. It's just getting biofeedback and developing a healthy climate. And what we find doing tests is much more richness in the fermentation microbiome in our native ferments. And then neutral oak for 3 months, so fermented in barrel, which again gives it a bit more texture. But I think it's a delicious expression of Carneros, very precise, very fresh, and lovely length on the palate. Cheers.
Yes. Cheers. It's absolutely beautiful, and I can see why this region is so important for sparkling production, but also delicious summer rosé drinking as well. That texture and that sort of just white strawberry component to the fruit is really lovely and beautiful. Carneros, very special indeed. And then finally moving to the most westerly AVA in Sonoma is the West Sonoma Coast AVA, and this is really defined by the coastal influence and by the winds that come off the coast, the setting sun on the vineyards here, and also, again, that cool ocean current that runs down the coast and creates constant airflow, constant cool influence, and also brings in the fog banks over the western side of that coastline as well. This region is renowned for cool climate Chardonnay and Pinot Noir in the most ethereal wine styles and most high mineral and umami, ocean spray driven style of Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. And I think if you see this wine, which is a lot of it is based in Occidental and those high elevation vineyards that are really important in this West Sonoma Coast AVA. This Chardonnay is made from several different clones of Chardonnay, and it is direct pressed, and it is taken directly to barrel and French oak fermentation, nearly 40% new French oak, and you can see that that gives that lovely savory, almost hint of sweetness to that very minerally and very green citrus driven fruit component as well. There's a lot of mineral, a lot of sea spray on this wine, and for me it's that hint of savory, flinty, hint of reduction, the lees element that comes from extended time in French oak, and without batonnage. We don't want to add the weight and the heft of batonnage to these very linear, very crisp, very juicy acid-driven wines that are capable of extended long-term cellaring and aging. We really want to keep that reduction, that reductive profile, and the profile with the lees, the Chardonnay with the lees, for that extended time to build a savory hint of smoky mid-palate there as well. A little, and 12.6% alcohol. So again, one of the lowest alcohol wines, which you expect from that very cool Unit 1, level of growing degree days. Very, very cool influence. And you can see that these wines are very, modern Sonoma, modern West Sonoma Coast, cool climate driven styles of Chardonnay that is really taking the US by storm, and I think taking the international markets by storm as well, knowing that California and the West Coast can produce these types of ethereal, restrained, well-handled oak styles of Chardonnay as well. And West Sonoma Coast, so very few wineries, less than 30 wineries, but several vineyards planted out on these coasts as well. And as the vine age increases, these wines and regions are really quite capable of growing without irrigation also. So a very sustainable region in terms of water management also. Only established in 2022. It's well worth a visit if you haven't explored this AVA. It's incredibly beautiful. The seafood off the coast is amazing as well, and as such there's been a lot of springing up of beautiful restaurants on the coast focusing on Dungeness crabs and albacore tuna that is caught just off the coast. And as I mentioned, elevations ranging from the coastal, right along the coastal edge at 400 feet elevation, right where the Pacific Highway runs through, up to 2,000 feet elevation, and some of the highest elevation vineyards are in the northern West Sonoma Coast and Fort Ross Seaview area. So a really important growing region, especially as we continue to explore vineyard plantings and vineyard designations where we don't require the influence of irrigation as well, and can be dry grown and cool climate styles of winemaking.
One of the curiosities of this region, Carneros is very low. Most California regions, the vineyards don't rely on altitude. The altitude here, so that's 120 meters to 600 meters, but oddly, what this picture shows, going higher makes it warmer. If you're right by the water, it's too cold. So you have to get high enough to be above the fog level that Brie was talking about. And so it's really cool by the ocean, but above the fog, so you can get the grapes ripe at all.
You get that important UV ripening happening that helps to develop the phenolics and the skin tannins, and then you also get that wind influence as you go higher in elevation as well. So go cooler and higher in elevation, but more sunshine days. So keep in mind when you're tasting and thinking about wines and wine regions that it's not only the heat and temperature that's important, but the UV element and how wind comes into play in these vineyards as well. And so higher elevation, more windier sites create smaller berries, thicker skins, more phenolic and tannin development in these wines as well. So something that we're all learning as we better understand our vines and continue to explore more and more regions and more grape varieties and beautiful wine styles. If you want more information, there is plenty of information on the Wines of California website, the Sonoma Wines website. Lots of information about the different AVAs, some education materials as well. And of course, don't forget about the California Capstone program as well that has levels 1 through 4 for educators in trade. Enjoy the last day of Wine Paris. I'm so impressed that you're all here.